Mm. Right. Dear students, in the last class, we had a discussion on the contract theory of Thomas Hobbes. Uh, the as we learned that there are three great philosophers of social contract theory. Uh, we have learned the social contract theory of Thomas Hobbes. We discussed about the state of nature, and also during the state of nature how uh, the the nature of the human being was like, because of the nature of the human being, how he had to enter into contract to create an absolute state, an absolute monarchy, so as to control and regulate the human affairs. And today, as part of the social contract theory, the second most important theory, that is the social contract theory of John Locke. He was a great philosopher of England. Uh, Today, we are going to learn how the social contract theory is to be understood, and the state of nature, and also the nature of human being, how the necessity arose to establish a civil society, and what kind of nature that human being was having during the state of nature, and what compelled him to create a civil society, and also a kind of contract that was created to create a kind of government based on consent, and how there was a contradiction between the necessity of protecting the natural rights, and also the necessity of establishing a civil government, a government based on consent, which sometimes has to work against the laws of the nature. And when the laws of the nature are not respected, people have every right to remove the government, because the rights, natural rights, that is right to life, right to liberty, and right to property, these were the natural rights for which, for the protection of which the governments are established. When they fail to protect those rights, the people have every right to revolt and remove the government. So here is a theory which says that human being and the natural rights are fundamental, and they can never be suppressed, and the government is there just to protect those fundamental, those natural rights. So he was for a limited government, a government based on the constitution, which guarantees the natural rights of human beings. It is a great theory because it laid emphasis on the natural rights of the human being. The earlier there was an emphasis, there was a focus on divine right theory, where king was the agent of God, and people should not revolt, and people were living just at the mercy of the king. And here is a theory which says that people are the primary concern, and the natural rights are very important. And for this, he has he developed this theory in the larger context of the Glorious Revolution. And Hobbes was a great scholar. He was in the context when there was uh, the civil war in England before the Glorious Revolution. And after the Glorious Revolution, there prevailed peace in England, and those peaceful conditions, influenced the philosophy of John Locke. So his theory was developed in the context of, the peaceful, onset of atmosphere in England after Glorious Revolution. So now let us try to, understand him in detail, and let us begin. Uh, let us have a look at the slides. Uh, yes. Social contract theory of John Locke. He was a great British philosopher. He lived during 1632 and 1704. That means it was late 17th century. His influence was in late 17th century. Uh, Here is John Locke. And he wrote a book called The Two Treatises on Civil Government in 1689. He also wrote many other books like Understanding Human Mind. There were so many other great works, but among those great works, the Two Treatises on Civil Government was very important. It was written in the year 1689. The Glorious Revolution took place in 1688 in England, where the king left the throne, and the parliament, the supremacy of the parliament was established. And this book, the Two Treatises on Civil Government, dealt with the two important aspects. He was strongly denying he was strongly denying the existence of divine right theory, and he was proposing the natural rights theory, limited government based on constitution, which protects the natural rights of human beings. So these two importance were emphasized. One was, the divine right theory was criticized, was sought to be, kept aside. The second one was, you know, um, proposing the natural rights theory. Human nature. Before we understand the social contract theory of Locke, we have to know the human nature, what kind of view he had about the human nature. He believed that man was a rational being capable of living in a society. So the rational character of a human being distinguishes him from other animals, because human being can establish his own law and also can live with his fellow human beings, as is basically a rational human being. The rationality is that, he doesn't want to be, you know he doesn't want to be harmed by anybody. Similarly, other human being will also think, will expect the same thing and same kind of behavior from his fellow human being. And that rationality enables him, and the capability of rationality enables him to live in a society. So his first instinctive was to live in peace and harmony with others. It is quite contrast to what Hobbes said about human nature. He said there was war everywhere, there was intense competition, and there would be chaos everywhere. That is what Hobbes said. But John Locke says instinctively human being is a peace-loving human being, and he wants to live in harmony with other fellow human beings. So that is entirely different. The perception of human being of Locke is entirely different from the perception of human being of Hobbes. Now, so this was the basic understanding of human nature, and the state of nature. What kind of state of nature prevailed according to John Locke is that to him the state of nature was not a state of war. Man is capable of noble feelings like sympathy, love, tenderness, and charity towards his fellow human beings. He says these feelings are the result of the innate nature of human being. The innate nature of human being is rationality. He can be capable of thinking, in rational manner. That is why the state of nature was you know filled with peace and compassion, uh, and during the state of nature the man enjoyed, every human being equally enjoyed the natural rights, the right to life, right to liberty, and right to property. These were the natural rights. They are natural in the sense that they are given to man by nature because of his rational nature. So these are the natural rights uh, given by the human being capacity to think rationally. So these are the natural rights: right to life, right to liberty, and right to property. The law of nature demands that no person should harm another person in life, liberty, and possession. So this is the rationality of human being. The law of nature demands that no person should harm another person in life, liberty, and possession. It's because every human being expects that. So that is why there prevails, peace. It was state of peace, goodwill, mutual assistance, and preservation. So it is the common sense or the common rational capacity of the human being that enables him to live with his fellow human being in peace and harmony. Uh, Now, after knowing the nature of the human being and also the state of nature, here the state of nature of John Locke was not pre-social. There existed a society based on the human nature of rationality. That is why it was not pre-social. It was just a pre-political. There was no political organization. There was a society, but there was no political organization. So that is why the state of nature of John Locke is not pre-social. It is just a pre-political. Uh, Yes, and he found. Now the question arises: the human nature is good, and it is peace loving, and it is cooperative. And why there is a need for establishing a political system? Now that is the question. We are discussing about social contract theory. This social contract theory says that the state is the result of the contract. Now here, in the state of nature, there would be peace and harmony, and human nature was also good. And what was the necessity for human being to create the state? That is the question now. Well, the question can be answered by the following way. There were, many shortcomings in the state of nature. Even though state of nature was, good, it was filled with peace, but there were so many shortcomings. What were the shortcomings of the state of nature? The peace was not secured. The peace was precarious. The state of nature would be upset by the corruption and viciousness of the degenerate men. So here the main problem with the state of nature was that the peace was precarious. Here precarious means the peace was short-lived. When that peaceful condition or peaceful atmosphere would be disturbed is not known to anybody. There are a few corruptive elements which are always, are ready to disturb the peace that was available during state of nature. Therefore, the peace was precarious. Precarious was, it was of limited nature. When it would be disturbed, nobody knows. So they were in fear of the state of nature, and the peace with which the state of nature was identified would be disturbed. That was the danger. That was the fear. That was how the peace was not secured in state of nature. And Locke observed that there were three drawbacks in the state of nature. Laws were not clearly defined. There was no common authority to enforce the natural rights. They identified the natural rights in the state of nature, but there was no mechanism to protect the natural rights. And there was no recognized and commonly accepted judge to settle disputes. This is another shortcoming, that in the state of nature, there was no judge. If any dispute arises, there was no judge to settle the disputes. So this was how the state of nature was filled with many shortcomings, especially three drawbacks. Here, the laws were not clearly defined. They require a legislature, and there was no common authority to enforce the laws. That is, executive was absent, and there was no judiciary. So these three organs of the government were missing in the state of nature. And because of that, because of the absence of these three, the peace was precarious. The peaceful atmosphere in the state of nature was precarious, was short-lived. And now, because of we found in state of nature two things. One is the state of nature was peaceful, and man was peace-loving, and also there were many drawbacks, especially three main drawbacks. So that is the reason why people entered into contract. The purpose of contract was to get out of the ill conditions, which was full of fear and continual danger, and to establish a civil society for the preservation of the lives, liberties, and properties of the individuals living in the state of nature. That was the purpose of the contract. They wanted to get out of the precarious position of the state of nature. So that is why people entered into contract. The men, made a contract to enter into a civil society of the state. This was a social contract. The contract was of all with all. The contract was limited and specific purposes. This is very important. So what kind of contract they entered into? They entered into contract to protect the laws of the nature, which guaranteed three natural rights: right to life, right to liberty, and right to property. So those were the natural rights, and they have to be protected. The people entered into contract and created a civil society, and that civil society authorized the government to protect those rights. If those rights are not protected, there is no rationale for the existence of the government. So they created a contract. That contract is for the limited and specific purpose. Limited in the sense that they cannot remove, they cannot erase the natural rights, the theory of natural rights, and they are bound by the natural rights. And the specific purpose was to protect them. So the government should be there just to protect those three natural rights. So that was the specific purpose for which contract was entered into. Two contracts, and John Locke speaks of two contracts. The first contract was a social contract which established civil society, and the second contract by implication was a governmental contract. Here we have to understand two contracts. One contract was they wanted to come out of the state of nature. As state of nature, the peace in the state of nature was precarious. They wanted to come out of it and establish a civil society, a state. So that was the first important thing. The important thing is that they wanted to protect the theory of the natural rights, the three natural rights. For that, they entered into a contract. And the second contract by implication was a governmental contract. It was a secondary contract because their first most important thing is to protect the rights, the natural rights, and that is why they created a civil society. So that was the primary thing. The protection of the rights, natural rights, was the primary thing. That was the first contract. They came out of the state of nature. And the second contract was by implication, that they established three organs of the government. That was a secondary contract. The government is authorized by the society, that is civil society, to make positive laws consistent with the laws of the nature. So the laws of the nature are the three, the protecting the three rights. Positive laws here. Positive laws means state government comes into existence to make positive laws, uh, and those positive laws are within the larger, purview of the laws of nature. So uh, John Locke speaks of two contracts. One is was social contract. The second one was governmental contract. Now, after knowing the state of nature and the nature of human being and the kind of contract they entered into, now let us have a look at the criticism that is being made on the Locke's natural laws theory. To Locke's, tacit consent is the basis of government, but he does not provide for the continuity of consent. So he says that government is created out of consent, but how long that consent will be in force, that he has not mentioned. Once governments are elected and a parliament is established, and the parliament is having a certain term, and till the term ends, the government thinks that whatever it does is because of the consent they have received in the elections, and they can do whatever they want, and it leads to a kind of dictatorship. So he did not provide for the continuity of the consent, which is which will be which is provided by Rousseau in his concept of general will. But this here he did not provide for the continuity of the consent, and he does not state clearly whether the original contract established the state or the government or both. He did not say. He simply says the people wanted to come out of the state of nature, and that is why they created a civil society. Here civil society means the which is based on the laws of nature, the natural rights theory, the theory of natural rights, and the government is created to protect that the natural rights, those three natural rights. uh, so this is the main criticism. He does not state clearly whether the original contract established the state or the government, and he did not provide for the continuity of consent. So he was not clear about whether he was creating a state or the government, and he did not provide for open consent. The consent was tacit. It was understood. It was not clearly made. His idea had great, now in spite of the criticisms and limitations in his theory, uh, his ideas had a great impact on French Revolution that took place in 1789. And French Revolution, as you all know, was based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. His philosophy of constitutional government, here the constitutional government, constitution based, the government based on constitution. So government has to function within the purview of the constitutional obligations. This limited government, the government based on constitution, this idea influenced the reformers of the 18th and 19th century. Especially it was the American Constitution which was greatly influenced by the two treatises of John Locke. His theory of revolt was a major contribution. It shows, it reflects the sovereignty of the people. When people were denied, when people were denied the rights, the three rights, right to liberty, right to life and property, then they have every right to revolt against the government and dislodge the government. So that was how he gave importance to the theory of natural rights. Just to protect the theory of natural rights, he created the government. People created the government. So that is how the concept of limited government, or the government based on constitution, uh, was the result of his great philosophy. And that is how his contributions are well taken by the constitutions of many countries, and the liberal democracy to a large extent has been influenced by his great philosophy of theory of natural rights. Thank you.